Good morning and good afternoon to my friends on the East Coast. My name is Jason Johnson, National Sales Trainer for MONI Smart Security. I'm really excited today to bring you into the core sales cycle or the sales process. You know, there's a lot of people on the call today, and a lot of us go to market with different strategies. So throughout the webinar, I encourage you to take notes and identify your sales process. Some of us just answer the phone, some of us go to appointments, we close the sale at the house. Some of us have to self-gen deals and knock on the door. So regardless of what that process is, each of us have one, and there's obviously going to be a more effective and efficient route to go if you tune it the right way. So that's what this training is all about. It's not about the scripts, it's about the foundation. Now, before we jump into this, just a couple quick housekeeping items. Today you're in listen-only mode. I encourage you to ask questions. If you do so, please use the chat box, use the raise hand feature. After the training, I'm going to distribute the PowerPoint for your reference, and then I'm also going to provide my contact information if you guys want to have a discussion on some of the material that we had today. So, what is the sales cycle? How can it benefit us? How can we apply it? So, for most of us, especially when we're new or we're starting off, we sometimes get hung up. We might stand outside the door too long, or we might be inside the presentation for too long. We don't transition to the table. So this is going to give us a very efficient sales process from start to finish, because we're going to cut out all the fillers and all the stuff that we don't need, and we're just going to stick to the things that give us value within each of our steps. So we're going to easily be able to identify what our step is, and more importantly, what our next step is. And then we are going to maximize the opportunity to have a very buttery smooth transition into the next process. So smooth, in fact, that your prospect won't even be able to tell that there's this big shift in the sale. And when you're able to kind of move them towards the finish line, just slowly nudging them along in a very non-confrontational way, it makes it easier for the prospect to eventually say yes, instead of these big, sharp, uphill battles. So ultimately, knowing these steps is going to make you a more consistent seller as well, pending you guys are still spending your time out in the field. And I'll give you a couple examples of this, and I'm sure we've all been here, but I'm sure you've seen a sales rep stand on the door too long, or maybe he's sitting at the table and he's not asking the commitment closes. So we're really going to be able to identify when we need a transition. And now we have a wide audience today, everybody from rookies all the way up to sales managers and some other corporate folks. So how can we use this training? What can you get out today? And, you know, one of the things that I've noticed, even myself included, is we kind of get into this, we stick to our guns and we use the same content and we use it over and over because it works very well. But maybe the way that I package this training is a little bit different than what you've seen in the past. And usually you can break it down into these little bite-sized chunks. It makes it easier for the sales reps that you're training to digest it and become more effective with it. So I'm hoping you can maybe take one or two of these slides, or maybe a little bit of some of the training, and you can use it for your sales training as well. So what is the sales cycle? This is essentially the framework of our sale, like we discussed. It's the foundation of which we build the rest of our sale around, like our scripts and, you know, all our word tracks and all the other tactics that we use within the sale. And I'm going to tell you a little embarrassing story about myself, and you guys can make fun of me for it, but I want to tell you about how I got into this job. It's kind of funny because when I initially took the job, I didn't really know it was door-to-door sales. I took it on a whim. Some friends were doing it, and I moved across the country to go sell for a monitoring station. And by the time I got there, it was middle of the day, Saturday, and they said, all right, guys, we're going to load up and we're going to start training. And I was like, all right, well, I can't wait to see this office. And they're like, no, dude, it's not an office. It's right upstairs in the hotel apartment. I'm like, wait, the office is in the hotel here or in the apartment? And they're like, yeah, it's in one of the rooms. And right away I'm like, what? So I show up, and there's 40 to 45 sales reps, from rookies to veterans, all just sitting there, and I'm just shocked that they could fit all these people in the little dining room. And the leaders get up in front of the room and they start talking about best practices and the hours. And it was something like, you know, we're going to show up Monday through Friday. It's going to be 11 a.m. and we're going to train till 1 p.m. and then we're going to go out and knock doors until dark. On Saturday, we're going to start at 9 a.m., no training, and just go straight out in the field and knock till dark. And I'm like, eyes wide open, looking left and right at me, like, what the heck is going on? I thought there was going to be leads, phone appointments, and I had no clue it was door knocking. So this was my first real actual learning about prospecting. Up until this point, I thought it was, panning for gold and doing those types of things. Immediately after, the guy that was leading the course says, you know what? Let's do a pitch. And they proceeded to do the short and sweet pitch that every one of us in the industry knows. It's the advertising approach, and it goes something like this. Hey, sorry to bother you. I was just supposed to ask about placing a sign out your yard. We're going to have our team coming through here in the next 3 to 4 weeks selling some of the new automation systems. And it helps when we have a few corner houses that have our yard sign out, just so we can increase the visibility in your area. Since you guys are in a perfect location, it seems like a lot of the neighbors are buying. We'd actually go ahead and sponsor your house with all the latest equipment if we could use your yard and if you qualify for the promotion. Now, do you know how the automation works? It was something like that. And obviously tuned up a little bit for the modern day. Back then, this was like POTS landline systems. But that's when I first initially learned about the approach, okay? Immediately after this, the guy's like, you know what, let's get some fresh blood up here. Let's get somebody else. And they probably saw the look on my face because I was like thinking in my head, don't pick me, don't pick me, don't pick me. And sure enough, guess who gets picked? So I feebly walk up to the front and, not very excited about what I'm going to have to do. Back then I wasn't really a big fan of public speaking. And I proceeded to just bomb the pitch completely. I mean, you couldn't have done a worse door approach. And, as I was walking back to my seat in defeat, I see people kind of like their shoulders are bouncing up and down and they're trying to hold in their laughs. And, my buddies who I'm with are kind of like nudging me on the side, laughing. And, when I went back to the apartment that night, they gave it to me. Like, they were laughing at and teasing me so much, but it was all in good fun. And this ended up being one of the greatest learning experience ever. So by Wednesday that same week, I still have not transitioned into a house. And on Thursday morning, one of the managers comes over and it's like, well, what are you struggling with? I'm like, my pitch is getting better. And I'm sure he was thinking, yeah, sure. He's like, well, show me your transition. And I was like, well, can I come in and talk to you about some of our systems? He's like, are you serious? That's what you got? And over the next 10 minutes, he proceeded to transform my transition into something that was way different, way more assumptive. We're going to talk about it a little bit. And I realized even if you learn some of these steps and you're not doing them very well, you can still be effective with it to a certain degree. And that's when I learned about the transition into the house, okay, which greatly increases the odds of us getting the sale. So it's a very important transition and a very important process to our sale. Well, after that, obviously that same day I got in about 4 or 5 houses. At this point, it was the furthest I've ever been in the sale. So I didn't know what I didn't know, and I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm supposed to go write the deal up. So I walked from outside the house and went straight to the dinner table, started filling out the contract, and the homeowner was looking at me like, dude, what are you doing? Like, oh, I'm going to hook you up with some advertising. He's like, I don't even know what this is. So I didn't get the sale, unfortunately. That was my attempt at a presentation, by the way. So I learned a little bit more, and by Friday, the very next day, my 5th day on the job, I met a guy. He had motorcycles. I raced motorcycles professionally as a young adult. And, he also had the Bastion helm, which I have. We clicked on so many levels, and even though I had no clue what I was still doing, I was able to effectively go from start to finish with manager instructing me over the phone on how to do the paperwork and forms, how to qualify the customer, and ultimately how to close out my sales process and get it scheduled for install. Now, even though I was able to effectively go through my 7 steps of the sales process, I still at this point had no clue what I was doing. And that's the whole purpose of this call. It's identifying and knowing the mechanics of what we're doing so we can be more efficient and effective when we're out in the field. So let's go into prospecting. Back in the late 1840s, prospectors from around the world were traveling to California for the gold rush with these grand visions of becoming massively rich. And, the truth is very few of them actually did. Most of these guys busted their butts. They worked like 10 to 12 hours a day, and on average, they could pan about a big pan of gold per hour. So they were working really hard, but they weren't working very smart. Towards the late 1890s, they started coming out with hydraulics, wash plants. They started coming out with dredge machines that you see on TV, all this cool technology to not only allow them to work very hard, but now they had the tools to work smart. And in the 21st century, we have so many tools, so much data, and all these great things and resources that allow us to not only work hard, but allows us to work smarter. So let's talk a little bit about the Sales Rabbit tool. This tool, you can feed data into it. You know who's behind the door. You know if they're a homeowner or renter. You know their occupation. You know their income range. You can qualify and pre-qualify customers before even knocking on the door. Imagine how much time that can save you over the course of a year, and imagine how beneficial it is to go, instead of going to a door and say, hey, I'm sorry to bother you, I was supposed to ask for the homeowner, are they around? Versus, hey, I was supposed to ask about Rick, is he around? It's very non-confrontational when you do it that way, and it doesn't put that, oh crap, it's a sales guy in the back of their head where they become very defensive and they start tensing up before you even go into your pitch. So the Sales Rabbit app, there's Spotia, there's a few other canvassing tools that work highly well for you managers out there. This also allows you to see if your reps are working the hours. When they're updating statuses and pins on houses in the neighborhood, it will actually GPS their location to make sure that they're in the neighborhood and not at the movie theater or the nearby Starbucks, or maybe in their mom's basement playing Xbox. I know that new Call of Duty game just came out. So what else? What else can we use to our advantage if we don't want to use a Sales Rabbit tool? Data today is so valuable. We know statistically that about 80% of new home buyers will get an alarm system. Of course they will. They just invested $300,000 into a house. Why not protect their investment with something that's very inexpensive, like an alarm or automation system? So we can pull lists from Sales Genie. We can use the Redfin app to find out who's closing. We can pull crime reports. Neighborhoods that have more crime will statistically have higher alarm purchase rates. Very important information to know. Or we can partner with real estate agents, and they can pull an MLS listing, what is very current data. This is showing to date, like who's buying a house right now. And we know if we can be the first person on their doorstep, in most cases, as long as we're a well-rounded sales rep that knows the sales process and we know all the steps within it and the framework, we can probably get that sale that same day. Now let's talk about partnerships. Why are partnerships beneficial? Well, this is more of a long-term strategy and a play. You can partner with HOAs, you can partner with builders, you can partner with people who are in the same or going after the same customer as you, like locksmiths, like fence contracting companies, like roofers. All these people do work with homeowners, and why not allow them to pitch the customer on give them a quick pitch and see if they want an automation system. If they're interested, they're going to pass on the referral. Now, this is more of a networking type way to market, but it's very beneficial, and it can become very fruitful and pay dividends over the course of many years. How to get started in something like this? Well, you can do a BNI group. BNI groups are awesome. You can go to bni.com, select a chapter near you. They only allow one person from each space in the meeting, so you're not going to have two alarm guys competing for the same relationship. You're going to have one alarm guy, one fence guy, one roof guy, one solar guy, and so on and so forth. So it's very meaningful to go into these networking meetings because it almost allows you to start speaking the language with these contractors. You learn the insights of how their industry and trade works. And so it allows you to actually go outside the BNI group and start partnering with people in that space. And when you know a few insights to the industry, it's very easy to start a conversation with somebody from that industry. All right. And the last thing, Dallas builders. Now I live in the city of Dallas, so you can do this with builders in your area, but these guys are public and they show where they're actually building out locations, where they're building out tract homes. If you can find the dot on the map and you can go there, it might be 50 or 100 homes they're building, and eventually all those homes are going to sell. And eventually almost 80% of those homes are going to have an alarm system. And almost every one of them typically are pre-wired. So why not go work those neighborhoods as people start to move in? usually you'll see once the neighborhood is established, it's developed, and people are starting to close on their houses, you'll see 2 to 4 families moving in per day. It's great to catch them that same day because they're going to set up utilities and everything else. Now, if you're on this call and you're like, dude, I can't get Sales Rabbit, I don't work leads, my manager drops me off in the field, and I have to work that area, how can this benefit me? Okay, let's talk about credibility. Just like a politician, when they're going to pass a new bill or a law, the first thing they need to do is gain major influence and gain buy-in by getting people advocating for the cause, because they know that people are going to petition against them. All right? In our day, and as a sales rep, out in the field and the internet of things and social media, it is so important to have credibility established, because you better believe that neighbors will immediately start calling you out on their social groups, door-to-door sales reps in the area, don't open it up. And that can be damaging to our credibility. So the first thing we need to do is start thinking about how to gain influence, how to gain buy-in when we get into these neighborhoods. So we have people going on this forum when somebody's posting negative reviews about us who hasn't even spoken to us yet. And they need to petition against this person. They need to be advocates for a cause and say, you know what, I spoke to Jason. They have an awesome product we got installed yesterday. We absolutely love it. This can easily nip any doubts about who you are and the trust factor. It can nip it in the bud very quickly. So we want to befriend people in the area. We want to talk to existing customers, their friend customers who are already using the service, people who don't even buy from us. We want to tell them the challenges we're going to be up against, and we want to use that to gain buy-in. And usually if I'm selling somebody, I'm going to literally at the end of the sale, I'm like, look, there's going to be some people who probably talked to people in the past, they might have been scammers. You guys know that we're the real thing. We're highly rated on the internet. Everybody loves us. We have over 1 million customers. If you see anything on your Facebook group or on the Nextdoor app, could you just tell them that we're legitimate and it's a great service? I'll give you $20. What that does is it allows us to build massive momentum in that neighborhood. And when everybody starts learning about what we're doing and they know about what you're doing prior to even knocking on the door, guess what you did? You established massive credibility and trust, because they know people who are already using the service. They know you're not a scam. So the next step with those folks is to actually build interest, need, do a logical approach, build into the emotion. And so when we're getting out there, we use a note tracker like you see on the right. And this is going to allow us to stay in that area and build a lot of momentum over the course of a week or a course of 2 weeks. I typically recommend having an area big enough to where you can work it for about 2 weeks, because you're going to know 40 names in that neighborhood. You're going to know who has alarm systems, who doesn't, who's been broken in. You're going to use all this intelligence that you're gathering to your advantage when you're inside the approach, and people are going to view you as the professional for it. Now, hybrid knocking sounds kind of complex, and this is the next thing I want to discuss, but it's very simple. This is essentially, back when I went into my first summer, I'll just kind of drift back into that story. I was literally going house to house my first few days, and I would come back and feel like I worked, really hard that day. I knocked on 100 doors. I did so great, but I was only talking to about 50% of the people at those houses. So you can imagine how much time I wasted sitting there on the doorstep feeling like I was working hard just because I was going house to house to house. It just wasn't the case. So hybrid knocking, the principle of it, shows us that what we need to do is actually skip houses that do not have signs of life. I'm talking, if you see no cars in the driveway, no lights, no doors open, garages closed, good chances that they're not going to open. However, if you don't see any lights on but the doors open and kids are out front playing, there's a very good chance of somebody that's going to come out and talk to you. So we're going to go up one side of the street, only talking to people that have signs like they're there, lights, doors open, garage open, cars in the driveway. And then we're going to go back down the street on the other side, and we're going to hybrid knock that. And then after we finish up, we're going to jump over to the next street, and we're going to hybrid knock that until about 5 to 5:30, and then we're going to jump back to the previous street and start talking to the harder to reach people. Remember, if they're harder to reach, they get pitched far less often, meaning that there's a greater chance that you can sell those individuals. The people that are home all the time, they get pitched nonstop for lawn care, pest control, you name it, alarms, solar. So the harder to reach people are the people you want to speak to, but you don't speak to these individuals by only staying in a day or staying in an area for 1 day or 2 days or 4 or 5. You want to stay in an area long enough so you know who's the hard to reach people and you know information about them from the neighbors prior to even going and knocking on the door. And of course, the last key principle to prospecting, now go back to the 1980s. There's this man by the name of Howard Schultz. He worked at a coffee shop, very small one. It was one or two stores. And he took a vacation over to Italy, and he noticed the coffee shops there were so much different. They were friendly. People went there and wanted to work. People knew, the employees knew customers by name. It was a totally different concept from what he knew. So he went back to his coffee shop owners and pitched them on this idea, and they, of course, declined it. Well, after that point, he quit, and he went 220 banks plus trying to get money to open his own coffee shop to replicate what Italy coffee shops had done. And somewhere around 220 to 240 no's, he finally got that yes, that seed money he needed to open up his coffee shops. And he eventually bought the initial coffee shops he once worked for 2 years later. And that's how Starbucks was born. The principle behind this is Howard Schultz wouldn't have became the man he is today, CEO of Starbucks, if he wouldn't have been very persistent. And day in and day out, when we're out there in the field, you've got to understand that we're going to hear probably over 100 no's. We're going to hear 3 to 8 no's per house that we talk to. It's up to us to just continue pushing through and know that we're just getting that much closer to the yes. But we can't continue on with a bad face. We can't have a bad attitude about it. We need to be primed up so when that one customer is available and we start presenting to them, we have the most positive attitude because that's going to transcend to the person we're pitching. So the approach. So I want to go back to my summer, my first year in the doors. That night after I left the training, went back to the room. My roommates all just were tearing into me, and we're buddies, so it kind of bothered me a little bit though. I was a little hurt about it. But I didn't want to practice with anybody. I felt so embarrassed I couldn't practice with these guys. So what I did is I sat there reading my manual over and over and over again. It was just really generic and basic, and they just had a couple scripts in there, like the advertising approach. And I read it over and over using the sub-vocalizing or the inner monologue, as some people refer to. And I felt like I had a good handle on it. So day one, I go out there in the field, and the first door I pitch, a nice woman comes out of the house. And I kid you not, she's like, "Hey, can I help you?" And I said, "Excuse me, sir." In the next 20 seconds, I proceeded to puke all over myself in my approach. And it was just awful. And I left that house thinking, why didn't the words come out the same way I was thinking of them? And it has to do with part of your brain. Not being able to actually, it doesn't hit the part of your brain that allows us to speak. It just helps us memorize, but it doesn't help us put the words together in the same order that we're actually thinking of. So there's a practice concept I want to give to you guys, and it's so powerful, and you guys can use this literally in every aspect of your life when you're trying to memorize something. And the way that we're supposed to practice verbal communication, there's 3 ways we learn. And you can apply this to also seeing, doing, hearing, but in this verbal, like reading a textbook, context, you got to read it, you got to say it, and then you got to write it. And if you do this over and over, you can take a script, and within 50 minutes to an hour, you can take it out in the field, and you can have it mastered by then because of this formula. So we got to read it, we got to say it, we got to write it. This is going to be the new foundation for you guys practicing all your scripts. And of course, if you're creating and writing new scripts, we're going to write it first, and then we're going to read it. And then we're going to say it. We're going to do it in reverse order. But this is the way that you managers who are writing playbooks and writing scripts can use this effectively, and then you can train your reps on it too. Now, that's not the end of our communication because just saying things isn't enough. We don't sell based on how the words we say. We We sell based on how we say it. So that's metaverbal communication. It's probably one of the most powerful tools in communication. And I want to give you the 4 pillars of this. The first is the rate that we speak. In some cases, you're going to talk a little faster. Sometimes you're going to slow it down. You're going to break it down. If you're pitching a senior or you're pitching somebody that might speak slower, you're going to slow down to their level. If somebody talks fast and you need to talk fast too, you're going to mirror them. You're going to talk a little bit faster. Okay, so we got the rate. Then we have the tone. Are we talking much higher? Are we talking lower? The punch. This is how we enunciate the words. Sometimes when we punch words and we say it in a very low tone and a very confident, it gives a different meaning to what we're actually saying. And I'll give you an example of your spouse. They call you and they sing with a very smooth tone, "Hey, Jason," versus "Jason." I know immediately that they're either delighted to see me or they're very upset because I forgot to take out the trash, one of the two. So this is used in everyday life, but people don't understand the mechanics and how you can naturally turn it on at any point. And by you seeing this, you're going to be able to take that into the field and start slowly shifting your communication, whether you're trying to make a very dramatic impact or whether you're trying to create more excitement and get people in a very feel-good mode and you're telling more of an exciting story. And then the volume. You know, in some cases, this is a tougher one because some people talk loud due to hearing disabilities, or they might tune out their own frequency because they're so focused on the words that are coming out of their mouth, and they talk so loud it scares the customer away. You know, of course, if the customer talks a little bit louder, we probably don't want to talk as loud as them. We want to slowly calm them down to a quieter tone, and we do that, they'll eventually naturally mirror us. But in some of the other parts, we want to mirror them and echo some of the same word choices they use. And of course, just knowing this now is not the end of it. Because when most of us start learning and start hitting the doors or going and doing our first sales presentation, or even to this day, if you haven't practiced your nonverbal, in many cases, a lot of us will look like this. And I kid you not, I've seen more people that look worse than this. But they're very friendly and very nice. They just don't know what they're doing because they're so focused on the words that are about to come out of their mouth. And so their body position is very awkward and locked up. And believe me, if somebody's coming at you at night or any time and they look awkward, you're going to be on high alert. All right? And you slowly shut down. It's the same thing with a customer that opens up the door. If you're crowding it, you're standing too close, you're standing awkward, you're squaring them up, then they're going to tense up and they're not going to want to hear anything you say. And this is one of the mastery phases of our communication that all of us need to practice, whether we're giving a presentation face-to-face, whether we're doing introductions with new coworkers, we're going into a sales meeting, you name it, our nonverbal communication has to be on point at all times. So how can we use this? How can we practice this? So my perfect thing that I typically advise new and intermediate level reps to do, I tell them to do a silent approach. Come and knock on my fake door, and then stand exactly how you're going to stand, use eye contact how you're going to use it, all that jazz. And usually what I see is they do it wrong. So what I do with new reps is I mold them to stand correctly, have the perfect nonverbal body language that's very non-confrontational. So when they're standing there at my door or going out that same day, they already know the way that they're supposed to stand, and now they need to add words to it. And here's what you can do at your house today. I recommend not doing it around your friends or spouse because they'll probably think you're crazy, but you can actually do your approach 2 to 5 minutes worth and record it and pitch to your iPhone or your phone and see if your hands are flailing around or see if your eyes are everywhere. You're making weird facial expressions. All of that matters when we're pitching the customer. Our perfect approach is stand back 5 to 10 feet, depending on the size of us. We are going to have a 45-degree body angle. We're going to give them a very slow, but it's eventually going to fill out smile. And we're going to have direct eye contact as we introduce ourselves. That's the way to gain the most. I guess, have the biggest positive impact in the first 5 seconds of your sale. Now, for those of you who haven't worked on some of our communication courses before, I want you to take a guess as to how much the verbal scripts that we say attribute to the persuasion and to the influence of a potential prospect. You can use the chat box. What do you think? What percentage of our communication do we attribute? Okay. So the verbal scripts attribute to 7% of our influence. And some of you guys are like, no, man, that's crazy. No way. And I'll put it this way. In most organizations and companies, they use the same material, the same step-by-step process. They use the same scripts. Why do some sellers double, triple, and quadruple numbers that other experienced sellers just have no shot of ever reaching? Because it's not the words that are coming out of their mouth. It's how they're saying it and what they're doing while they say it, and making all three pillars coincide. Our nonverbal attributes to 38%. And in metaverbal, our 4 pillars will attribute to 56% of our impact at the door, in presentations, during the close. So it's a very important subject to actually study. Now, I really want to grind this in, but I want to actually give you how can verbal scripts, how can we use that 7%? And because even if it's little or tiny, we still want to give ourselves the better chances. So how can we use verbal scripts to improve, our presentation, our influence? And let's just use a couple, simple words that we use. An old friend of the call. Thanks, John. So what are some words that we can actually use? A lot of us say words like contract, monitoring center, cost, price. How can we transform that to be, I guess, a little bit more positive? We're pitching customers. Well, we can say words like agreement, our monitoring command hub. Cost, price, we can say investment. Much more positive when we say that. Promotion, advertising, signature. Let's replace that in our scripts with our unique programs, ambassadors, our partnerships. And instead of signature, can you authorize this? And then, of course, we hear a lot of times when we're saying, this is a no-brainer. And, of course, when you're talking to friends and just out of context, you can say those types of things. But if you say this to a customer who's still making a buying decision, it's actually an insult. Like, yeah, you should have made up your decision. This is a no-brainer. ABC company is horrible. Anytime you speak badly about somebody, it puts a negative vibe in the person you're pitching. That's why you should never do it. There's a better way we can go about maybe telling that you have an advantage over that company. And then adding a false sense of urgency by saying, you need to sign up today. Sorry, my line's blowing up. You need to sign up today. We can add a real sense of urgency by just putting things in our scripts that naturally make the consumer want to buy from us that day. So going back to the system is a no-brainer. How can we benefit with using our scripts? Well, I would say something like it makes a lot of sense for the people in the area to take advantage of our programs because of this, this, and this. Or ABC company is horrible. Yeah, I've heard of them. This is what makes our program a little bit different and more unique. And then, of course, let's see if this program is a good fit for both of us. After, we can see if you qualify for our free promotion or our ambassador sponsorship program. So thing to do today, a little homework assignment, go through your scripts and identify whether or not you have some words that may give off more of a negative vibe instead of something that can be sending positive information to the customer just by the wording. And of course, next, I really want you guys to understand the nonverbal. Somebody comes up and you say, hey, how's the date going? And their face looks like this. It's probably not going so well. Or what about if you're cooking food for their friends and they say, oh, I love it. but they're giving this face right here? Or what about if you go up to a person in the store and you say, hey, can I help you? And they look like this. It doesn't matter what it is, guys. Our nonverbal communication speaks much greater and higher than the words that are actually coming out of our mouth. So make sure that you guys are practicing your nonverbal just as much as you're practicing your scripts. Now, moving on to the next subject, and I want to give you guys a little bit of an illustration diagram here. In most cases, people think that the sale is a straight line, just like you hear them talking about how success is a straight line, and it's not. It looks more of like a stunt helicopter or airplane doing all these flips and twirls and turns until you finally get to the finish line. And that's somewhat true and applies to our sale as well. You know, the goal of our sale is to start an approach, and then as we overcome an objection, we want to address it non-confrontationally, but then ultimately control the conversation back to the perfect sale line. And I'm going to show you what an experienced sales rep will do on the door. And you can see we'll just call this person James right here. James went out, and on the approach, he got a not interested objection. Took him a little bit off course, but eventually he overcame the objection, and he went right back down to the actual perfect sale line. And then he got another objection. We already have a system. He was able to overcome that objection again and then get slowly back down towards the perfect sale. And he kept it within the relevance of the sale. He didn't start talking about UFOs and spaceships and, you know, all this different stuff happening on CNN. He didn't go out that far. And that's why we have a relevant and a not relevant subject. When anytime we get out to the not relevant after an objection, we're not adding value, we're actually devaluing what we're doing, and we're getting closer to actually having them tell us no, and we'll have to move on to the next house. So let's look at what a beginner or a rookie would do in some of these situations. Well, we have the objections. In many cases, they'll do something like this. They'll go off and they'll start talking about barbecue, what they're doing on Friday night, whose party or whose house they're going to, or, you know, do you have a cigarette I can bum? Something that's just totally off base. And eventually they leave the house before they even transition. Or they may borderline that relevant, not relevant line, overcome some objections, but only get so far throughout the presentation and say, until the prospect says, you know, can I think about this? Because they haven't built enough value. They haven't stayed in the bounds of being relevant. So the question is, how can we overcome objections effective enough where it's non-confrontational, allows us to move past the objection and back into the sale where we can build a lot of value? Well, I want to teach you guys the art of objection handling. Now, first off, we need to understand what smokescreen objections are. And I'm sure all of us have heard treat every objection like it's a request for more information. That's somewhat true. A smokescreen objection is your standard. Can I think about it? Do you have a card? We already have this. We have a dog. We have a gun. Any objection you can think of, it's always a smokescreen. The only objections that I would put a little bit of weight into, or they carry a little bit of weight, is probably the objections like so-and-so has power of attorney on my house. Or in some cases, my spouse makes the decisions. And there's a way to handle those and really figure out if they're just kind of giving you the runaround or if it holds water. But aside from understanding our smokescreen objections, we need to avoid confrontation. All right? Anytime a prospect says, well, we already have a dog, and you're like, well, the dog, that Chihuahua is not going to protect you from a burglar. That is direct confrontation. That prospect, that homeowner, is going to slam the door so fast in your face because you're not agreeing with them. Even if it is a Chihuahua, or even if it's the most ridiculous objection you've ever heard, you've got to agree to it. And that's where the art perfection comes in. So we're going to expect objections. We're going to overcome 4 to 6 per house, even when we're at the door, and we're going to use the art formula. Now, what is art? It's agree, reply, transition. So we're going to agree to what the homeowner says. We're going to then control the conversation back because we're agreeing. So now that we're agreeing, they're going to let us continue to talk about why they're right, because people love hearing that they're right. And then we're going to reply by talking about how our promotion is a little bit different, or this is, you know, a little bit different than what last company came by, or so-and-so did. And then we're going to use a transition, and this might be a diversion tactic back into the sale, or it might be a question. And there's a lot of different things you can do with your transition points, but let's see an actual example with a real script. And this person obviously told us that it was too expensive. So, you know, I can't afford this. These systems are too expensive. I completely agree. The systems with the automation and these touchscreen panels, they've gotten so expensive, and that's actually why we're doing some sponsorship programs in the neighborhood. We're just trying to find 2 people in the area to help us out with our new sign. We recently rebranded, and with you guys being right here in the neighborhood, in the center or the corner, it's a perfect spot for us to get a little bit more visibility with the high traffic area right here on the stop sign. Now, can I ask you a question? Do you actually know how the automation systems work? So I'm agreeing, I'm replying, and then I'm using a transition question there. A lot of different things that we can do, but ultimately this is the formula, the recipe that you want to build all your objections around. So what's a training exercise we can do to this? I want you guys to list every objection. You'll find there's probably about 10 different objections after that. They kind of start blending into the same thing. Write down all your objections and then use the ART formula for rebuttaling every single one. You're going to have to come up with objections outside the house, at the door, inside the house, so you guys know the most effective way to get around them. Now, the transition, like I mentioned earlier, is the most crucial and important part, the most important transition part in our sale. This is where we effectively go from outside the house to inside the house and start building the value. Probably 30 to 40% of our odds of getting the sale actually increase at this point. So it's so important you get inside the house and start talking about the systems. But how do we do it so smooth and non-confrontational that the homeowner feels very comfortable with us? And I want to go back to what the manager told me in the garage. Because initially when I was just asking people, can I come in and show you the automation systems? And it obviously didn't work at all. So what they said is, hey, when they asked, or when you ask the transition question, do you know how these systems work? You're going to proceed to show them how they work on the front door, and then you're going to start asking about the other doors. And identify a door that's a little bit different, like a glass one or French door, or maybe one that just has a glass panel in it, and then say that you arm those doors a little bit different after asking some questions. And questions would be, you know, is that a double pane or a single pane door? Do you know what the construction of the frame is? Is it wood, aluminum, metal? Okay, is that door, is it fiberglass, is it metal? Okay, we arm those doors a little bit different. You mind if we take a look at it really quick? And then I simply just start moving towards the door. And even though I didn't have that door transition down, and I was doing a very, probably, 50% version of what the leader wanted me to do, it still worked. So the rule is here, as long as we can do it well enough, it's going to greatly increase our odds of getting inside the house. So what is the secret to this transition? Well, before we can transition, we obviously need to establish interest. To me, it's like, no, man, I don't need an alarm. I don't want this. I don't want that. Like, why would we even try to transition to the home? Not only are we wasting their time, but we're wasting our own time. We could be pitching somebody that's generally interested in having automation or alarm. Of course, we want to be the professional. Just like if the Comcast guy or a home service repair guy comes to your house, he doesn't sit out the side of your door like, awkwardly and is like, yeah, do you mind if I take a look at what we got going on here? No. You open up the door, he's like, hey, I'm Ross from so-and-so. What do we got going on? And he slowly starts proceeding towards the door because he's the professional. That's the same assumptiveness that we need to have when we're walking into the house. We have to ask. We have to ask permission to go inside. And even though it's phrased as, it's kind of coined as a rhetorical question, we still need to ask their permission to come inside. All right? And then once we ask, we're going to assume, and then we're going to go inspect whatever we needed to come inside for, whether that's the back door, that might be the panel, or that might be something else. Either way, we're going to go inside and take a look at it. Now, once we get to the presentation, this is where the meat and potatoes of the sale really happens, where we build all the value. Up to this point, we should have not discussed majority of the products we offer. We should have not discussed price. We should have not discussed monthly rate. None of that stuff. all the value building happens inside the house. Now, just like when you guys go to a doctor's office, the first thing I do when you're sick, they ask you a ton of questions. They start troubleshooting everything, asking about how many alcoholic drinks you have, if you're a smoker or non-smoker, if you take prescription or medication, if you have any family diseases. They ask all these questions because it allows them to do the diagnose and prescribe that we need to also do when we're inside the sale. So this is going to allow us to not only diagnose what the big problems is, but once we find that problem and we can solve it, we're adding massive value to our offering. Okay? So we have questions that we're going to ask throughout the entire sale from start to finish, but the questions that we ask evolve tremendously as we push through the sale. For instance, on the doorstep when we're prospecting, we're not going to say something like a commitment question where we're like, yeah, if you can pay the $45 a month and sign up for the 60-month agreement, we'll actually go ahead and comp you some of the equipment. Closing on the door, how many people are going to say yes to that? It's a fraction of a percent. You won't get a sale in a week. Let me just break it down like that. You could knock 10 hours a day for 6 days a week, and you won't get a sale if you said that on every single door. So our prospecting and approach questions, we're going to do pre-qualifiers, find out if they're a homeowner. We're going to ask them if they've heard about the programs you're doing in the area. You're going to explain and educate them on the advertising and ask them if they've seen other advertising for alarm systems. Really basic and generic questions like that. As we start to build more value and credibility in ourselves and the offering, now we're going to start talking about the home information that they have, the back door, the panel, things that we use to get inside the house. Okay? And then we're going to ask our transitional questions. You mind if we take a look at that really quick? Or, we arm those doors a little bit differently. Let's take a look really quick. And then we go in. And then when we get to the presentation, we just have all these different questions that we can start opening up to. And I want to just give you guys a little bit of an understanding of what each of these questions are. FORD is an acronym. Dale Carnegie wrote a book, Win Friends, Influence, back, I think it came out in the 1930s. Great book, but he talks about family, occupation, recreation, and dreams. That's what FORD is an acronym for. Once we get inside the house, people love talking about their family. They love talking about their jobs. They love talking about what they do as a hobby. And they also like talking about what's a dream of theirs. And we can use this to win friends, gain buy-in, build credibility, and then slowly divert back into the system and get to our intelligence and discovery phase. And our discovery phase is discovering what their problem is, the diagnosis. So we're gaining intelligence, and we're not just gaining intelligence about them, but we're asking them about the neighborhood. We're asking if there's been problems. We're asking them if there's been fires. Because remember, once we get outside this house, we got to start canvassing and prospecting again. So we want to find out more information about the area. Then we can get into tie downs. Mr. So-and-so, if we give you all this product and you qualify for it, would you guys use it? We can add tie downs like that to start getting them to commit to the small yeses of our sale. There's a rule of thumb, a lot of sellers say that you need to get 10 yeses in a sale prior to getting the final commitment yes. And that's very true. If you get the person saying yes to, are you the homeowner? Can you come in? And yes to a lot of the products. Have you heard about security systems before? All these little yeses, eventually they're more prone to say yes. It's an old school tactic, but it still works today. And then the diagnosis solutions. Once you find out what their problems are, put some salt in that wound. Just keep rubbing it in and make that wound even bigger. If they tell you that their big concern is the basement window, you got to go to that window and say, I can completely see what you mean. I mean, this is ground level. You can't hear anything upstairs, I imagine. Is that correct? And then this latch, somebody can just kick it in. Have you had problems with this? Wow. And then, once you start really making their concern bigger, then solve it. And that's what really gives them a reason to buy your product. And then our final questions, we can start using option closes. Mr. Prospect, do you think your panel would be better by the front door where your kids come home from school, or better by the garage where you and your wife come home? Things like that can really get them to agree to the system. It's just like asking, do you want the shirt the red or the blue? You're not, asking, or I guess you're not thinking they may not do it. You're assuming that they are going to do it, and you're asking these options as to how they want it done. And then the commitment closing questions. And this is where you ask for the sale. Without the close, you are purely just an educator. This is where the compensation is paid to you. This is where the customer actually gets the alarm. They get protected, the automation. All the benefits of the sale comes from the close. But as you can see, it is not a 0 to 100 in the first step. It is a step-by-step process, just like our timeline here, as you see our question-based selling. And just so when you guys are crafting your questions should be different as you transition to the house. Now, I know we have a lot of slides here and a lot of content within this deck, but I want to speed it up a little bit. So the presentation, features versus values. For you techs that might start sell, a lot of the techs and a lot of individuals who are just starting to learn this, they want to go and say, oh yeah, we got the door sensors with the glass breaks, we got the 5220s, we got the image sensors. Remember, this is just like somebody coming to you and saying, hey, your doctor's coming to you and saying, hey, we're going to put you on whatever. Like, you're like, man, I don't even know what that is. It's the same thing when you're pitching customers just on the product and the features. We want to whittle it down all the way to the benefits. The benefits is where the customer understands how it's going to benefit them and how it's going to make their life easier or make them more money. And I have an example on the top because we all love coffee or energy drinks. Why do we drink them? We get energy. What happens when we have more energy? We become more effective. We increase our productivity. As entrepreneurs, when you increase your productivity, of course, you increase your cash flow. So it's really important to whittle all your products down to the benefits. And now, if you're ever in a competitive situation, like I might be competing against Big Blue or another competitor, I want to say the advantage of my product over them. So if they're using the GC2 and we're using the GC3, I might say something like, yeah, the GC2 is great. We actually started using that panel back in 2010. We've now switched to the latest model, which is the GC3. It's a bigger touchscreen. It's easier to use for that reason. And they've actually come out with this, and this. And I'm going to break it down and go into detail and show them how that's going to make their life easier versus using the GC2 with the other person. All right. Now, I kept you guys some slots here. I encourage you to go through your entire product offering and write down the product, write the feature of the product. There might be multiple features, by the way. The advantage over your competitors, your biggest competitors in your marketplace, and then talk about the benefits. And you should be so versed on every one of your products that you can regurgitate it at any point. Now, the key elements of our persuasion come from 3 communication channels. And I'm sure you guys are looking at this and you're like, did I learn something like this in high school? And of course you did. This is kind of the Greek pillars of persuasion: pathos, ethos, and logos. Ethos applies to our ethics, our credibility. When we talk about how tenured we are, how long we've been in the industry, it's applying to ethos. When we give a statistic, 50% of elderly folks over the age of 25 have their first fall. It increases after that. That applies to logos. And when I told you guys my story about how I got into sales in my first summer, it applied to pathos, which creates mental imagery. Statistics show that if we can be more pathos during our presentations and give vivid stories on how the products work and tell how it may have saved somebody in the past that we are going to create more emotion, and that is the key to pulling the prospect's heartstrings, so to speak. So we're going to mix and match this, of course. We're going to apply stories to our credibility. We're going to apply and give statistics, apply to the logos. But the pathos is what we really want to stick to. We want to stick to our stories. We want to use case studies inside the house. This is what's going to really drive the emotion and also allow you to allow them to understand more of your features. Okay? Now, of course, I couldn't go through the presentation without giving you guys a very simple framework. This is my presentation at, I guess, a 30,000-foot view. but we're going to inspect all the entry-exit doors after we get inside the house. I'm going to do an in-depth overview of how our program works, how it benefits the customer, and how it benefits us. It's a two-way street. We're going to talk about the interior protection. Of course, not every customer is just going to get 2 or 3 doors in a motion. If it's an elderly folk that stays home all the day, why would I give them a motion detector? They might be better suited with the glass break. Then I'm going to start talking about the panel. I'm going to talk about all the features, and more importantly, I'm going to talk about how it benefits the customer. Okay? I'm going to tell vivid stories throughout this process. I'm going to educate them with these stories. Then I'm going to talk about our phone application, our remote access. And then I'm going to start prying to see if there's any automation needs so we can increase our RMR. And then, of course, video solutions. By sticking to a framework like this in the presentation, you're guaranteed not to miss a step, and you're guaranteed to maximize the value of what you have to offer. Now, the sit down is where we're going to summarize the presentation. Okay? So we're going to go right into our forms here, and usually what I do at this point is I'm standing up, my internal siren is going off and saying, all right, Jason, it's time to transition. At this point, I say something like this to the customer. I'll say, you know what, Mr. Prospect? Let me actually just show you a couple things and leave you with some information. Mind if I have a seat? And as I'm saying that, I'm actually sitting down, so it's just very assumptive. Now, when I came into the house, and to back up a little bit, if the table is on the way to their back door, or if I'm walking by it throughout the presentation, I will leave my iPad or binder there if I do not need it, because guess what? By the end of the presentation, it gives me a reason to have to go back to the table to sign them up. Okay? So, the presentation summary. We are going to summarize the entire value of every product and service that we have to offer, typically on a paper form. I don't just jump into the e-contract. I like actually writing it out because seeing is believing. Again, I'm going to talk about the program perks, the free system move, the warranty enhancement plan. I'm going to talk about the VIP service, the copay, how all of it works and how it benefits them. I'm going to talk about the sponsorship program. I'm going to slowly start collecting the personal information. Remember, step by step. I'm not asking them if they want the system. I'm just slowly asking them for their name. Okay? I'm going to gain small commitments along the way using my tie downs, my option closes. And then I'm going to call and qualify the prospect. And this is where we verify that they are a homeowner, they have sufficient credit, they're not a current customer, and they're not under contract with an existing monitoring station, at least longer than 3 months. In some cases, customers will pay their way out to get a new service. We don't encourage it. However, it happens quite frequently, especially with our customers. Once we get them qualifying the customer, it's time to close. We built the value, we've showed them the need, we found the hot buttons, we've diagnosed and we've prescribed, and we've designed a system specifically for their needs. It's not the same system as we gave Mr. Thomas, it's not Mr. Johnson's system, it's different. It's custom made just for them, okay? So once we get done qualifying, I'm going to do an engine check. I'm going to ask a temperature check. And this can be just a very simple question to make sure that they're on board. It's not a dramatic yes. It's not a dramatic no. It's just something that gets them addressing that they're going to proceed in the sale. And then I'm going to ask a closing question. And there's several different closes we can use. I like asking at some customers' houses, I like doing a position close. And this close basically applies to the tactics of negotiating, where you don't speak first. And I don't mean you're going to ask them a question and just sit there silently. I mean, I would typically ask something like, now, Mr. Prospect, if you were to have to pay for this because you didn't qualify for the service, what do you think you'd actually have to pay for the installation and then all this automation? Okay. And then, of course, you have to have the service. What do you think that would cost? So by getting them to tell you what they think it costs allows you to then reduce it down to the rate. You're adding in position. So many sellers, they go to the rock bottom price because they think that the customer might say no if they charge them too much. But in that customer's eyes, they may have saw massive value and they may have paid $150 a month, like their cable service, if you ask them for it. So we never want to ask for the lowest rate. We want to start up top, use our basic negotiating skills, and then slowly work our way down to if we get in a competitive situation. And this is going to help you guys that constantly go in and do $10 off. and then sometimes have to even get negotiated down from there. Now, once I actually break down the pricing, I'm going to talk about the value adds again. I'm not just going to say it's 44 bucks, 99 to install. What do you think? No, I'm going to actually go through the values, and what this covers, Mr. Prospect, is it covers the two-way voice, this, and this, the warranty, all of that we discussed. It's going to be a longer version than that. But I'm going to go through all of it, and then I'm going to finish with a very simple board code. And usually it's now, Mr. Prospect, when our alarm system goes off, we like having a safe word at the house. This is used for you guys to abort the police if it's an accident and you accidentally maybe set it off when you come inside. But if it's a burglar and they don't know this safe word, we're going to dispatch the police here immediately. What do you think you'd want to use? And then I use my nonverbal communication, and I start looking down at my closing box on the paperwork, and I'm ready to write. That shows them that it was a question, and I need to fill it out. Okay? Then I'm going to have them authorize my paperwork. I'm going to do my setup call where I do the authorization, the happy customer survey, make sure they understand it's 55 bucks a month, 60-month agreement. Ask them if they know what contents are coming in the package, all that different stuff. And then after that, I'm going to solidify my sale. I'm going to make sure it's concrete prior to leaving the house. Because when the sale is not concrete and there's an unanswered question or two, the customer is always going to go on the internet and start making their own assumptions. And in our business, just like cable, we have so many customers, we can't satisfy them all, of course. So what we need to do is make sure that we satisfy all the questions so they don't see any bad reviews or anything else on the internet and then cancel later on. So I'm usually going to ask them now before I go, this is what you're getting. Do you have any other questions? I would hate for you to call me tomorrow and say I didn't or left you with some unanswered questions. I want to make sure I keep all my gold stars. And if they say yes, I do have a question, great. You can address it face-to-face right there. If they say no, even better. You were very effective. Okay, so the end of our close is to solidify the sale. Usually at that point, I have the tech already on the way, and if it's somewhat within the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to make small talk with them, maybe talk about a couple other small features and cool things. And as the tech arrives, I'm going to do a formal introduction, and usually I'll say a joke to kind of break the ice, like, oh yes, so-and-so used to be a male model, even though he might be 250 pounds and stomach showing or whatever. Hopefully that's not the case, but I want to do that introduction just to make sure that they feel like he's a part of the team. Now, how can we implement this? We've talked about a lot. We've covered all the 7 steps to the sale. Let's talk about implementation. As we start practicing this, and like I mentioned earlier, I want you guys to write out your sales process. I want you guys to look at each and every step and say what is key and what is a necessity within this step and what is just a complete waste of my time. Because I might be doing that on 6 steps, and it might be actually making my sales process another 20 minutes longer than it has to be. So I want to cut out all the fillers and just stick with the things that build value. And then I want to practice my key transition points. Like I mentioned earlier, if you can go from prospecting all the way down to the close in a very non-confrontational way, just being buttery smooth in your transitions, it naturally flows the customer towards the close, and they don't even know that they're getting close to the close because you're seamlessly transitioning them through the sale, and it's very easy for them to go along with it. Remember, customers will buy when it's an easy closing process. They don't have to jump through hoops. The harder it is for them to buy through you, the more often that they're going to say, can I think about it? I need to talk to my spouse, and the more objections you'll eventually hear. Okay? Now, for you managers and trainers, this is what I want you to start doing effective immediately. I want you to have on each of your sales guys knock sheets, what we talked about earlier with managing territory. I want each of those guys to talk about the transitions and their key sales process that you guys each go through. So I have contacted, approached offer, door transition, presentation, the sit down, and then paperwork, and of course we'll know if they close. The contact is, did I talk to a qualified buyer at the door? If I did, I'm going to mark that with a tally. If I didn't, let's say it's a renter or they weren't home, I'm not going to tally that. If I got down and I did my whole door approach and I told the customer the actual offer, if you can help us with the advertising and you qualify for a program, we'll actually sponsor your house with all the automation you guys need that you've probably seen on TV. Now, do you know how they work? That would be my approach offer. If I got down to that part, I'm going to make a tally. If I didn't, I'm not going to tally. And what this does is it allows us to see where each of our sales reps need help. Remember, humans are very dynamic. And we all have different skill sets, and we all have our own, downsides, you could say. Some have very sharp skill sets with presenting, closing, and they're maybe not very good at initially building that introduction because they're very aggressive by nature. So we can see by using this as to where to effectively train each of our direct salespeople, whether it's the contacted approach, the objections, maybe we want to talk about the presentation, or maybe a guy's doing it awesome and we want him to start influencing some of the younger sales guys on the squad to start training with him or going out and actually seeing his transition. So this is one implementation tool I want you guys to start using, and you're going to see right off the bat who has very sharp skill sets at which stage or which process of the sale. Now, guys, that's all I had for you today. I know we're finishing right on time. I want to answer some questions here, but before we do that, I just want to finish with a little bit on how that first summer ended with me. I ended up about 5 or 6 weeks in really hitting pace, and several weeks I sold over 10 deals, 15 deals, and what was my greatest week that first summer, and I finished among the best first-year reps out of the East Coast. And at the end of the summer, there was only about 25 of us left. We started with 65. And these people were so capable and very smart. And at the time, I really didn't know why they didn't make it. And what it came down to was the commitment. I wasn't out there to just try it out. And if I didn't like it, I was going to come home. I made a commitment that I was staying out there until the end of the summer, regardless if I was making money or not. Of course, I wanted to make money, but that wasn't my true purpose. So when you guys are hiring, when you're doing your correlations, have people commit to the process. Tell them it's going to take weeks to really learn this. Give them a real expectations of what they need to do so they can financially plan to stick it out in this job for 5 to 6 weeks before they really make it work. And if you do that, you're going to see more sales reps becoming successful in your organizations. Now, guys, I'm going to distribute this PowerPoint here in a little bit. I appreciate the time today. I hope you found the information very valuable. And if you have any questions, please feel free to email us at MONI